Guys, honestly, I am having a hell of a time trying to record this one. I loaned out my lav mics. They have not returned yet. I was like 5 minutes into a first take of this, and I gave a thumbs up, and I guess the reactions thing on my computer generated a thumbs up and then crashed my OBS. Wild. But I'm trying again, and I'm going to try very quickly because I have to log on to work in about 10 minutes. So, today's topic of discussion: why ebooks are evil, or at least the people behind ebooks are evil, and why we all need to start investing in physical books and change our habits of consumption. I know it's a lot, but let's just dive in because time is tight. So, why are ebooks evil? Well, and maybe I'm a little late to the party on this one, and in fact, it should have been quite obvious to me from the start when ebooks were first rolled out, but the thing about ebooks is that, first of all, they are not real. They don't actually exist, which means you can't ever actually own them. Not really. At least until you take your EPUB file, or at least when you could take your EPUB file and then perhaps print it out or typeset it and produce your own written book from it, although they really don't want you doing that. The other thing is that, of course, if the ebook is not available to you locally, let's say directly on your device, like as a distinct file that exists there, right, with the ability to download, you don't own it at all. You paid essentially to borrow something or to use it at the good graces of, whichever evil mega corporation happens to own them. I mean, in most cases now it's Amazon. So this already is a massive issue, and it's something that really frustrates me about modern life in general, the fact that everything has gone subscription, even in cases where it is technically more practical, such as the Adobe suite that I use to edit this stuff. It is great to get it upgraded all the time. I do treat that like a service because, I don't always necessarily need it. At a certain point, like, how many editions of Adobe am I going to buy and stack up? Sure. There's a ton of problems with that too, though. And of course, the big thing is that when you go subscription for anything, books included, the companies have the ability to change things, remove features, remove content, and you honestly have no recourse. And this is where we run into the big issue with books, aside from the fact that, yes, they can just yank it off of your e-reader now and say you don't have access to this anymore, or worse, this book doesn't exist. The big issue is that companies can change the contents of your ebook. Now, there are certain cases where this might seem fine. For example, if there's a typo happens, they can go in and fix it. Okay, sure, that seems relatively inoffensive. Or maybe if it's a book translated from another language, maybe a more accurate translation is available, something a little more faithful to the spirit of the work. And they say, well, come on, hey, we're just trying to make for a better reading experience. This is more what the author intended. Okay, maybe, but still, the translation I'm working with was the intention of that author who translated it as well. There is a dialogue between original work and translator too, which is important. For example, the numerous copies of Dante's Divine Comedy that I own, each translator brings their own flair to it, right? It's not that one is necessarily better or more accurate than the other. Kind of. So that might seem innocent enough, but then of course we come to the fact that you can just straight up change the content. And this is really dangerous because of course you can just outright disrespect the intentions of the author. Here's a good example. Right now I am reading The Discourses by Machiavelli. I think I showed this to you in another video, and it came attached to The Prince because, I don't get the impression that anybody actually reads The Discourses. The Prince is actually quite a short book as well, so I think to make it kind of worth their time, they printed them together. Now, if you've read The Prince, you know that Machiavelli has a very unique point of view about how somebody should rule. In fact, a lot of the advice that Machiavelli gives to would-be princes, it stood out against the, let's say, Christian ethic of the time. For example, there's the famous passage that, it's better to be feared than be loved. Machiavelli gives advice about how you should, for example, not let a public slight slide. Regardless of whether it's somebody relatively ineffectual or, of course, an enemy of concern, let's say, you have to punish them immediately and you have to make a public example out of it. Now, you can disagree with Machiavelli's politics or his philosophy of politics and rulership, but that is the work, that is his opinion, and it may, to one degree or another, be valid, accurate, and yes, even useful. But what if somebody goes in and changes what Machiavelli writes? What if they say, oh, no, the prince says it's better to be loved than to be feared, and you should, as a prince, do whatever it takes to make your subjects love you. You should feed them until they can't move. You should bombard them with media that's going to keep them occupied, entertained, at least sedated, and then, that way they never rise up, because look at all the wonderful things you've given them. You've given them so many distractions. They have these wonderful phones where they can text each other all the time and play games and, go down endless rabbit holes on stupid things like TikTok. What if they changed the book to say that? Now, obviously, this is an extreme example, and I would hope most people would go, this doesn't seem like a book from the Renaissance, but the point is that this can be done. And the reason that this is so dangerous is because we are increasingly becoming detached from this reality, right? From the written book itself, from a physical, indisputable record, let's say, of things. Now, indisputable, again, in the degree that, for example, like is the copy you have in hand, is it true to the original manuscript, for example? Is the translation accurate? Like, with all those caveats, this is still the prince. This is still the prince in the discourses on Livy. But if you start changing things like that, well, I don't know. Maybe some of the older and wiser among us are aware and we can call it out. But if we're not around, we're not paying attention. Well, for the younger generation who might be consuming an ebook of the prince, even though, let's be honest, most young people are not reading. I think the only market for ebooks these days are perhaps college professors and YouTubers whose whole niche is, reading classic books, talking about philosophy, things like that. But, the average millennial and especially the average Gen Z, they're not reading, guys. At most, they're maybe listening to an audiobook, which, again, has its own issues, because there, too, you can change the text, and because it's usually on as background, people might not notice that something has been changed. But, as we increasingly digitize our society, we are going to be moving away from these. I mean, you can kind of see the trend moving this way already. So for me, for example, 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, when I first got on this whole craze about being a Renaissance man and reading as crazy, as much as possible, right? Having this bibliomania. Even there, I noticed it was actually really hard to satiate that appetite, because the quality books that I wanted to read, like Leviathan, for example, were really expensive. I think when I first saw this exact edition in chapters, I guess it was maybe it was Chapters Indigo at that time. Regardless, I think it was like $29, which, okay, you can say, hey, it's worth it to read Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, but I mean, that adds up. And I was reading multiple books a week at a time, so that habit was going to be very expensive. I think I only paid for this one, $5.99 for a perfect, this thing is in flawless condition, right? So, I mean, that was crazy expensive, but I always noticed that, the latest ghost-written celebrity autobiography that's full of questionable and probably degenerate advice about life, that was always $10, and they were happy to have you read that, or maybe the latest tell-all by a political figure trying desperately to paper over the evils of their career. Those were all cheap, but any book that actually was worth its worth the paper its text was printed on was prohibitively expensive. Or worse, you just couldn't find them. The prints, you can usually find like one beat up copy now floating around Chapters Indigo, but The discourses, I mean, good luck. If you can even find it in their online store, I think at that point you should buy a lottery ticket, because these things are that rare. And more, of course, as ebooks are starting to kill off the printed book, and we all start to realize that bookstores are kind of Potemkin villages anyway, right? Where they do just put out the bestseller slop, and with the understanding that nobody's even going to read those necessarily, that those books are just meant to be on a shelf and look good on a shelf. As we move more and more towards that, and as the few people who are reading increasingly go towards the digital space, well, at that point, you can start changing things, because people aren't going to know. They're not going to know what Machiavelli originally wrote. They might not be able to reference it, right? Project Gutenberg exists, and that's fantastic, because it's a great effort to freely distribute, ebooks and plain text copies of some of the great classics, right? Even some of the more obscure ones. It's a fantastic effort, but you can't delude yourself into thinking that Project Gutenberg can never be taken down or compromised. It's possible. It is possible, and people will want to do it. There are good reasons to do it. People reinterpret religion, for example, all the time. And I mean, do you have the Bible or the Quran or any of the many Buddhist sutras committed to memory? No, you don't. You don't. So people can go in and change it, especially if it's only available in a digital form. If the first copy that somebody gets a hold of, of any particular work, right, even the Leviathan, if the first copy that anybody gets a hold of is compromised in that way, how are they going to know? If they're not a scholar of the work and they haven't read it previously, then they can't. They really can't know. They might gloss over it and not even realize. And now they have the wrong idea in their head. Somebody's planted an idea in their head because they changed the work. Whereas, at least now, even if a particular translation is not the right word, even if a particular update, let's say, to the English that Hobbes was writing in at the time, right, a better transliteration perhaps is the word, is available, I can compare those versions and kind of understand what's going on, but I will still know at the end of the day that they are probably true to the spirit of the thing. But now, if I come across a digital-only copy and I've never read Hobbes before, I've never read the Leviathan before, how am I supposed to know that anything that he's writing here is accurate? You can be deceived. You can get bad information going out there, and then as that proliferates more and more and more, and people start to cite that bad work, they start to share it back and forth, and as usually happens now on YouTube, the whole content mill gets going. Stoicism is a great example, right? People, even without actually changing the texts, have created this whole niche on YouTube where they've really perverted the idea of what the Stoic philosophy is. They've commercialized it and rolled it out to the masses and are kind of using it in a sinister way to tell people just shut up, keep suffering, keep grinding, bro, and trust us, it'll all get better. When there's a lot more to it than that. I promise you, if you read the actual Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, you read any of Seneca's works, you'll see there is a lot more to it than that. But because bad information is getting out there, people aren't going back to the actual things and reading them for themselves and reflecting critically upon them. Well, now we're in danger, honestly, of losing our past, right? We're risking the destruction of our culture, our history, our heritage, and the philosophical foundations of our Western civilization. Yes. And the same is true for any culture that starts to go towards a digital-only space. I mean, what kind of future are we going towards when a mega corporation is going to dictate what I know about the last 5 centuries, let's say, about the Renaissance through the Enlightenment, or what happened in the course of the Roman Empire or human prehistory, when they have the ability to rewrite that? And if we don't buy these and take care of these and reproduce these and produce more commentary and discourses on them, if we don't do any of that, we are going to lose our history. Now, maybe people can start saving stuff now and reproducing it, and I would really encourage people to do it. But, as much as possible to avoid that kind of future, first of all, you have to not buy ebooks. I mean, I'm just telling you straight up, unless you know that you can immediately download that, you can verify that the text is accurate, and then you can print it out or prepare it in some form that is relatively permanent and can't be tampered with by external forces. Like, unless you can do that, don't bother. don't bother. And this is coming from somebody who owned like one of those godforsaken Kobos and used to fill it up with everything that was available on Project Gutenberg. Don't do it. Okay? It is cheap enough if you can find them to buy used copies of stuff in great condition, and then you maintain them. Read them, enjoy them, understand what you're reading as much as possible, and then make the effort to preserve them, you know, whether that is copying from hand, right? Which is actually a great exercise and something I may talk about in a video down the road, right? Reproducing the works of an author by hand, or even if you just want to type it out, add your commentary. I think Luke Smith has done this for a number of out of print books. I think like the etymology of, I think it was Isidore of Seville. I think he's added some notes into that. I believe he also, funny enough, reproduced the meditations from the original Latin, I believe as well. So you can do that. And that's actually a worthwhile endeavor. And he allows you to print those works and get access to the physical book. And then again, you can maintain that. You can keep it on your shelf. You can go back to it and read. You can engage with his particular interpretation of the work. We need to be doing this as much as possible. We really do. And yeah, like take the time to preserve these, you know? For example, I'm really enjoying reading the discourses, and the cover here is not particularly inspiring, but you know what? It is mine, so I can choose to do whatever I want with it, and I may have it rebound because it's been that enjoyable for me and it's given me a lot to think about. So why not? Or, the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini. I'm not, by the way, Penguin, if you're listening, I'm not using this edition to do the audiobook I'm currently sharing on YouTube. I'm using a different one. But I mean, even this, right? The fact that I have this and I can kind of reference it as I'm working on that autobiography, like that's fantastic, right? And I'm still doing my work to preserve it. I'm putting it in my voice. I'm keeping the files, locally, as well as publishing them out there, of course, so that again I can transmit an accurate record of the thing. Because I really, really believe we have to preserve this stuff. And I mean, this is a prime target for rewriting history, so to speak, because Cellini was a bad dude. He was a bad dude. Okay, there's a lot of he was a murderer, serial philanderer, among many things, right? And I don't want to lose that. Cellini is fascinating because he was a great artist and a bad man, and I wanna preserve that as much as possible. So, to end like usual on an admonition, command even at this point, I'm gonna say, guys, please, please, please. If you have ebooks, you got a Kindle, whatever, find some way to get that stuff off of that godforsaken tablet. Get it locally onto your drive. Preserve the files, get rid of the DRM if you can, and print those suckers out and make sure that they are accurate. Make sure they haven't been changed already. But if you can, just avoid buying an e-reader altogether. Don't mess with like Apple Books or whatever the hell it is on the iPhone or the Google equivalent. Don't do it. Don't do it. If you want a book, buy it used if you can to save yourself some scratch. Read the thing and then preserve it. Do whatever you have to engage with it and make it interesting to maintain. Share your thoughts on the works, right? Be honest about what you're writing. Even if you disagree with the author, be honest about what they always say. And let's preserve our culture and our history as much as possible. Don't allow people to take that away from us. Move it online to a place where it can be controlled and ultimately erased. It's really that important, guys, and I hope you'll hear me out on that.